A small town in Nevada faces disaster. A holiday weekend, 250,000 tourists, and a 1,000-pound bomb that could explode at any second. The device cannot be disarmed. It cannot be moved without detonating.
Here we have the all clear. Stand by for
For the FBI, it's a worst-case scenario.
In 1980, the FBI faced the largest explosive device they had ever seen. The bomb was sophisticated, carefully constructed, and designed to destroy an entire building. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Agents and bomb experts responded from all over the country. Their mission, to disarm the deadly device and stop the dangerous extortionists who built it.
Stateline, Nevada is a small tourist town straddling the border with California. The town has just 1,300 residents. The largest industry is gambling. With all that cash lying around, it makes an appealing target for criminals looking to make a big score. August 26, 1980, 5:30 a.m. at the receiving entrance of Harvey's casino. Two men tell security they're delivering a new copy machine. The security guard gives them directions to the executive offices on the second floor. He has no idea what he has let in the building. This is no copier. Shortly after 6 a.m., a security guard making rounds notices something unusual. The door to the executive office is jammed. It looks like the lock has been glued shut. He manages to get the door open. The guard notices a bizarre-looking metal box in the middle of the room. On the floor, he finds a letter. According to the letter, the metal box contains a massive bomb. The guard contacts the Douglas County Sheriff's Department. Captain Ron Perini.
It was about 6:30 in the morning, and I received a call from one of my sergeants who told me that they had found a device at Harvey's casino.
Perini calls in the Tahoe Douglas bomb squad. The device is huge and made of metal. According to the letter, it contains 1,000 pounds of TNT. That much TNT could blow up everything within 500 feet of the casino. The letter also says the bomb has 3 separate timers, each set for different explosion times. The device cannot be moved. It cannot be disarmed. Unless authorities come up with $3 million in cash, the bomber threatens to blow up Harvey's casino. He also threatens that if the FBI thwarts this plan, then the bomber will strike the same hotel again.
Yeah, this thing was big, and if it was real, and it did go off at that time, none of us would be alive.
The complexity of the design and amount of TNT tells law enforcement this bomber means business. This device could blow up the entire block, and the police don't even know when it is set to go off. The bomber is holding all the cards.
There was no indication from the bomb squad members that this was a false bomb, that it was just a shell. They felt it was very real. So there was a lot of issues going on at one time. How are we going to secure this? How are we going to provide the safety for everyone?
The casino is packed with gamblers. The hotel is full of guests. With a bomb that size, police have to get the hundreds of innocent people to safety. Over the next several hours, 600 hotel guests are moved to a nearby high school.
And it's scary, to tell you the truth. It's very scary. If this bomb would have gone off in that casino, we would have lost 600 people.
As the guests are being evacuated, Captain Perini assesses the situation and determines he needs help.
We're a relatively small department. We certainly don't have the expertise as some agencies may have in dealing with extortions and the resources and the money and all the things that go with that to do a proper investigation. So because it was an extortion, we called the FBI immediately.
Special Agent Bill Jonke.
We typically have extortion attempts at the casino, the Stateline. We've had those before. We've had plenty of small bombs placed here and there in various casinos.
At this time, the FBI was receiving nearly 100 extortion threats a year against casinos, but they were seldom this serious.
But I never, in my wildest dreams, envisioned a bomb of this size and this complexity.
There are 28 toggle switches on the top box. Each one is numbered.
They were all in the same position, in a downward position, except for one toggle switch, which was numbered 23. That was in the up position. We didn't know when we looked at those toggle switches, of course, what they went to, what they were for.
Any one of the switches could deactivate the bomb or detonate it.
They gave me a letter, which turned out to be an extortion letter, that identified various components of that bomb. And reading that letter, I realized we had a big problem here. The letter indicated to us that there was 1,000 pounds of TNT in this bomb. And judging from the size of the large box, I think it was pretty consistent that 1,000 pounds of TNT could fit into that larger box.
1,000 pounds of TNT has a huge blast radius, enough to destroy more than one casino. That would devastate this small town.
We blocked off the casino corridor area on US 50, made sure no vehicles could go through. We told the other casinos to vacate the immediate area near Harvey's, and they did that. They even boarded up some of the windows to make sure that if there was an explosion, that would cause the glass to break and hurt others.
As the sheriff's department closes down the streets, the bomb squad works on the device. The crew does not wear their bulky bomb suits because nothing could protect them if a bomb this size detonated. First, they want to know exactly what's inside the metal casing.
What kind of bomb is it? How big of an explosion is it going to be? Is it going to affect the businesses across the street? Or how far will it go? Is there chemicals involved? Is there even nuclear stuff?
Herb Hawkins is the assistant special agent in charge of the FBI's Las Vegas field office.
Well, the device was X-rayed in parts because no X-ray machine was that big. So about a third of the device was X-rayed, then another third, then another third.
In all, the bomb squad takes over 200 X-rays. They also photograph the device and dust for fingerprints. Getting paint samples is much riskier, but for the FBI, it could be an important clue to identifying the bomber.
Ultimately, we may find a guy who's got that kind of paint in his garage.
Investigators also find a small drop of blood on one corner of the device. It is collected as potential evidence.
We may be able to find a guy whose blood matches that which was taken off the bomb. That's a good investigative lead for us.
The latent fingerprints, paint, and blood samples are sent to the FBI lab in Washington, D.C. In the lab, technicians will analyze the evidence in the hopes it will lead them to the bomber. But for the agents on the scene, the first priority is to disarm this bomb. In the command post, Investigators study the x-rays of the device.
The bottom 3/4 of this lower box was very high density. The x-rays couldn't penetrate it. That told us, in essence, that it was explosive in there, or some kind of material in there filling that bottom box. We could see wires from the top box going into that material in the bottom box. We presume those were wires from the detonators, from the blasting caps, into that explosive material.
Scientists from NEST, the Nuclear Emergency Search Team, analyzed the bottom portion of the bomb to calculate the potential blast radius.
They estimated that we were looking at about a 1,500 to 2,500 foot blast area where damage could be somewhat significant. And of course, inside of 800 yards, we're looking at more than severe damage, and of course, total destruction within 200-meter radius.
We realized this guy knew what he was doing, that it was going to be an extremely difficult bomb to defeat, if it could be defeated at all.
Agents are in an impossible position, but they must find a way to disarm this bomb, and fast, before anyone gets hurt. In Stateline, Nevada, extortionists plant a massive bomb in a crowded casino. The bombers demand $3 million, or they will detonate the device. Within hours of the discovery of the bomb, investigators from all over the area arrive in Stateline. Sheriffs from Douglas County, police from South Lake Tahoe, as well as El Dorado County. Special Agent Bill Jonke.
They started just flooding in because they knew we would have a lot of work to do. We began bringing in FBI agents from surrounding districts almost immediately.
As bomb experts work on the device, agents go after the extortionists.
We needed every patron in that casino to be interviewed with the chance that maybe they had seen something, a vehicle being involved in the delivery of this bomb, something.
Authorities set up toll-free hotlines. Captain Ron Perini and the Douglas County Sheriff's Department work closely with the FBI.
We want to know if there's any witnesses, if anybody saw these people bring the device into the casino. What about vehicles, descriptions?
The FBI questions the security guard. He tells them about seeing two men delivering a copy machine around 5:30 a.m. They were driving a white van.
We knew that we may have a white van involved in this. We knew by then exactly what time that bomb came through the casino. We knew we had two people pushing and pulling that device.
Investigators try to locate all the white vans in the Lake Tahoe area.
Law enforcement officers were stopping these vans and finding out who the operators were.
While agents on the street search for possible suspects, technicians continue to analyze the device. But the news is not good. This bomb is formidable.
On that first day after the diagnostic work, the x-rays, the interpretation of that extortion letter, we realized that we weren't going to move that bomb. That we, in fact, had a viable, functioning, live explosive device. We didn't know what the explosive inside was. We also figured we had explosives in that top box that made any sort of render-safe procedure extremely, extremely difficult. By late afternoon, we decided that we were not going to penetrate this bomb with any equipment that we had or that was developed anywhere in the country.
It appears the bomber has won. The FBI must take a new approach. They are going to have to cooperate. That evening, agents meet with Harvey Gross, the owner of Harvey's casino.
We thought we might have a very good opportunity to arrest, to identify the people involved in this crime through the delivery of the money. So we wanted to comply with the instructions.
The bomber wants $3 million delivered to a remote location via helicopter. In exchange, authorities will receive instructions on how to move the bomb and detonate it safely.
We told them the problems we were having with this bomb, and we had a window there that was closing as far as getting the money together or deciding what we were going to do.
Agents feel that $3 million in cash is the fastest way to find him. The casino owner is skeptical.
And he said to us, "What are you going to try and do with this person?" And we said, "We are going to try and catch him." And he said, "Well, if you're going to do that, I'm not giving him $3 million. So he gave us $5,000, which we appropriately marked, and the rest was cut up paper.
An FBI pilot will fly the helicopter. Since the bomber has forbidden any radio contact, the pilot will wear a wire. He must land at a designated spot at South Lake Tahoe Airport no later than 11 p.m. At 12:05, he will receive further instructions.
He specified that no law enforcement be involved in this operation whatsoever. Well, that was pretty unrealistic. We, of course, had numerous law enforcement people stationed and concealed throughout that airport in an effort to identify anyone that could be seen near that airport that might be linked to this extortion attempt.
The pilot lands at South Lake Tahoe Airport at exactly 11 o'clock. In a nearby building, a team of FBI agents and police monitor the pilot's wire.
We were waiting for contact from the bomber. And at 12:05, just as he said, the telephone rang in the telephone booth.
Okay.
The caller instructs the pilot to look under the shelf of the phone booth. There he will find further instructions.
Follow Highway 50 to the west, the right-hand side in a straight line.
He read that note aloud as he stood there outside the phone booth. That allowed us to hear and to know what that letter contained, and we immediately dispatched ground units in the direction that he was told to fly.
The pilot is instructed to fly west along Highway 50 at an altitude of 500 feet. At some point, he will see a strobe light where he is to land.
Not much altitude in the mountains like that. Very, very low, very, very hazardous for a helicopter to be that low at midnight. We were going to do the best we could to provide ground coverage for the protection of our pilot, and also obviously to arrest, to apprehend this perpetrator if that was at all possible. So immediately we had cars traveling westbound on Highway 50 for the sole purpose of either one, encountering the subject or the suspect in this case, or two, ensuring the safety of our pilot.
A SWAT team flying 1,000 feet above the FBI helicopter will provide added security.
The thing that always makes you more apprehensive is the unknown. We didn't know who you were dealing with. We didn't know if we had 10 people, one person, 2 dozen that were going to meet that airplane.
The FBI pilot flies west, following Route 50. He maintains an altitude of exactly 500 feet as he searches for the strobe light.
That wire, please. I just fought.
There is nothing but darkness below. It seems the bomber is playing some sort of deadly game, and the FBI is at his mercy. Stateline, Nevada, 1980. An FBI helicopter searches a 15-mile stretch of Highway 50 for a signal from below. The extortionist who planted a massive bomb in a local casino has demanded $3 million. Agents know that appearing to comply is their best hope for arresting the bomb maker. The pilot flies through the mountains in the dark at an altitude of only 500 feet. He sees no signal from below. Assistant Special Agent in Charge Herb Hawkins controls the search operation from the ground.
He came back, he flew it again. and he flew it again. We kept sending him back down the route.
Hey, we're looking where we can go. We got trees and wires down here.
Then after he got through with his 15 miles, we put him at 250, 300 feet, which he was scared to death. This was an experienced Marine helicopter pilot who joined the FBI. And he's flying treetops, trying to comply with and make this successful. And he keeps calling me, Herb, I got nothing. I have nothing. Everything's quiet, you know. And so I said, okay. Then at 4 o'clock, we brought him back.
Stand by.
It seems the bomber has won again. All the FBI's attempts to establish contact with him have failed. If he doesn't want the money, what does he want? Agents turn to their only other lead, the airport telephone booth where the bomber left instructions for the pilot. Special Agent Bill Jonke.
We, of course, examined that telephone booth for latent fingerprints, and we interviewed a few people, but we basically came up with nothing. Nobody had seen anything at that airport that was suspicious in nature. So that was a dead end. We had not established contact with the extortionist. And that was of grave concern to us because we needed more communication.
The next morning, the FBI asks Governor Robert List of Nevada to hold a press conference. He needs to convince the bomber to reestablish contact.
This request is made due to a failure of enlightenment and a confusion in following the previous directions. The hotel is prepared to comply and is standing by as before.
We had basically silence on Wednesday. I think that the people were too cautious to make another contact.
For the Tahoe Douglas bomb squad, it's a potentially deadly dilemma. How can they move the bomb without knowing what's inside?
It was very heavy. It was made of steel, and it was loaded with up to 1,000 pounds of explosive. We couldn't just pick it up and carry it out of there. We realized to even move it, even if we had a safe way to move, would require 3 to 4 people. That's way too many to have anywhere near a device that could explode.
Even if they can move the device to the parking lot, then what?
We, in essence, have a giant hand grenade here. If it exploded, it would send steel shrapnel all over the place. We really couldn't afford to have it outside.
Agents and bomb experts do not know if the massive bomb is set on a timer, if the extortionist can set the bomb off remotely, or exactly how volatile the explosive material inside is. They have some hard decisions to make. One member of the team makes a radical suggestion.
Our experts told us, and we all agreed, that if we could explosively separate this top box, knock it off the bottom box at a very, very fast speed with explosives, we could defeat the electrical current from the battery that was being generated and maybe avoid a detonation of the main charge.
The plan is to use 6 pounds of plastic explosives to destroy the top box. In essence, the bomb's brain.
If they could sever that pulse from actually going down to the dynamite, it may not go off.
Everything depends on whether or not the top box is also rigged with explosives.
If the top box contained dynamite, then our explosive separation would fail because, in essence, the bomb would, what we call, sympathetically detonate. In other words, the explosion from our attempt to remove the top box would detonate all the explosives in the bomb.
It's a risky procedure. The entire casino could be destroyed. They need permission from hotel owner Harvey Gross.
And what he did say was, as long as nobody gets hurt, we can't keep doing what we're doing. We're going on for hours and hours and hours, and nobody can come up with a solution other than that, then that's okay. There was tears in his eyes, and he basically was giving us a directive that you take care of everyone here. Make sure nobody's harmed. I don't want anybody hurt. If the device does go off and it destroys a casino, we can rebuild it.
The bomb squad sets up a linear-shaped charge, positioning the explosives to destroy the top box.
Wires were run from the explosive charge to a window outside and eventually to a firing point out in the parking lot.
There is no way to know whether the shaped charge will successfully disable the bomb or detonate it.
We hoped that we would separate that top box and that there were in fact no explosives in there and we'd have no detonation. But we were fully prepared, and I have to say we expected detonation of up to 1,000 pounds of TNT, as the letter had indicated. So we were prepared for that when we fired that shaped charge.
At 3:55 p.m., Sheriff Jerry Maple broadcasts a warning. The disarming attempt is about to begin.
Okay, we have the all clear. Everybody stand by. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
In a casino in Nevada, FBI agents face the biggest bomb they've ever seen. A device packed with 1,000 pounds of explosives. Their only option, blow the control box off the top of the bomb with a small explosive charge.
All units stand by for countdown, please.
Special Agent Bill Jonke watches from the roof of a nearby casino.
We had high-speed cameras prepared for the detonation. We were watching. We were keeping our fingers crossed. We, of course, could hear over the radio literally the countdown.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
The plan has failed. Part of the casino has been reduced to rubble. Assistant Special Agent in Charge Herb Hawkins.
We had a major mess on our hands. We had a hotel that had been blown downward 2 stories, blown upward 2 stories. Numerous pieces of device, rebar, concrete, chips, wall, desks, furniture, all mashed up, and in some of it in the hotel, down in the hole, some of it up on the 2nd and 3rd floor, and a bunch of it out in the parking lot.
All of us probably had the same thought. We were thankful that we had not a single person with as much as a scratch. Nobody was hurt. We felt relief that the bomb, in essence, was gone. There was not a danger from that bomb anymore. Having to go back up on it for a day or two was getting stressful for everybody. So we felt a relief when that thing went off. If you destroy or damage a building, that can be rebuilt. But loss of human life or casualties is something that can never be healed. Myself and a few of the bomb technicians went into that building right away, right after detonation. However, it was pretty dangerous.
Rubble is everywhere, and the FBI is concerned the rest of the building might collapse. Once it is secured, agents go back into the casino to search for clues.
We commenced a very thorough crime scene investigation, as you would have to do in a bombing case, as your crime scene is really the key to helping you solve the puzzle.
But in this devastation, finding those clues will not be easy.
When a bomb goes off, the components just don't evaporate. They become much smaller and obviously disfigured, but they're there. They're there in the rubble. They're there in the crater at the bottom. They're there. Our job is to find them and identify them as components of the bomb.
Authorities estimate it could take nearly 6 weeks to process the crime scene. The FBI can't afford to give the bomber that much time to cover his tracks. Within days of the explosion, the Stateline casinos offer a $250,000 reward for the arrest and conviction of the extortionists.
We hit every news media outlet with that information in hopes of somebody calling. We generated and started a hotline, a 1-800 hotline, so that anybody in the country could call us toll-free and provide information
for this reward.
The offer of a large reward brings thousands of leads, but no solid information.
Several days went by, I'd say 7, 8, 9, 10 days, and we got leads from this offer, but we didn't get what we considered to be viable leads from this. The group that was responsible for building and placing this bomb was probably very close-knit, maybe even a family, because we weren't getting any information.
Agents hope that in the rubble they will find one piece of evidence that will lead them to the bomber.
At the end of the 40 days, we'd recovered approximately 108 pounds of a bomb that we felt probably weighed around 800 pounds. So we recovered about an eighth of it. The items that we recovered primarily were heavy steel items that survived the blast.
As each piece of the bomb is recovered, it is shipped to the FBI laboratory in Washington, D.C. This is the first opportunity the agents have to really study the bomb.
We were able to determine the type of switches that were used, the mercury switches, the type of explosive, pieces of cardboard box, things that would point where and how the device was constructed.
Laboratory analysis tells agents a lot about the bomb and something about the bomber.
One of the early things that we did was have the metallurgist look at the bomb components we were recovering and determine the stresses on those pieces of metal from a metallurgical point of view to tell us what forces were exerted against them in the blast. And by doing that, we could put a family of explosives into this. And while the threat letter said it was TNT, we're not about to take that on face value. We want to know that the damage was consistent with an explosive like TNT, which it was not. So right away we know something about the bomber. He didn't tell the truth in the letter. He was trying to tell us something that would get your attention.
The bomber used dynamite instead of TNT. Because TNT is more powerful, he probably mentioned it to intimidate investigators.
It was a very complex scheme, and therefore, when you looked at the device, a complex mind had to have put this together. A very painstaking, patient individual. This was not built in a day. This was a device that looked like it had taken weeks, if not months, to build. And to build it without drawing attention probably required even more time.
To try and learn more about the bomber, agents asked for assistance from FBI profilers at the Behavioral Science Unit then housed at the FBI complex at Quantico. Profilers determined the bomber is probably a male, in his late 30s or early 40s, with some sort of bomb-making experience. Based on the complexity of the device and the letter, they feel the bomber is egocentric. He believes he can outsmart investigators.
Hawkins?
And the bombing profile is extremely difficult. It's not like a murder where the guy leaves certain fingerprints at the scene. Bombing is a lot more complex. Personal, when you shoot somebody, it's more impersonal when you build a bomb and you put it under his car and turn around and walk away. You don't have to sit there and watch.
He doesn't like to get close to his victims. The agents also suspect something other than money motivates this bomber.
Is this a terrorist act? And what's the goal of this particular act? Is it to just make money? Are these people involved with narcotics and drugs? Do we have organized crime, the mafia? We did not believe that organized crime would try and pull this type of thing. We didn't think the druggers would try and pull this type of thing. They like to remain off the skyline.
Investigators are running out of leads, and the bombers seem poised to strike again. In Reno, 40 miles north, 4 more casinos received bomb threats. In Stateline, Nevada, the FBI searches for a dangerous extortionist. He's already blown up one casino, and in his extortion note, he threatened to do it again. The FBI fears the bomber is simply toying with them. In Reno, 40 miles north, 4 more casinos received bomb threats. Investigators search the casinos, but no bombs are found. Further investigation reveals these threats aren't connected to the Harvey's bombing. Agents again appeal to the public for help. They distribute descriptions of the suspects based on the security guards' recollections. Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Herb Hawkins.
We were bombarded with thousands upon thousands of phone calls.
In early September, agents receive an intriguing tip. 3 former employees of a jet aircraft plant moved to Reno just before the casino bombing. According to the FBI lab in Washington, some of the electronic components used in the bomb resemble aircraft parts. Aircraft engineers could have the technical savvy to put together a device like this. Special Agent Bill Jonke.
They fit our profile, if you will, of being a group. They had access, they had experience in explosive work. They looked pretty darn good. And we spent a lot of investigative man-hours looking into these people and covering the leads from this group that extended nationwide. We focused on this group with a lot of our resources for 2 to 3 weeks before we were finally able to eliminate them as suspects.
It's one of many dead ends, and the bomber has gone strangely silent. Desperate for leads, investigators review every phone tip they have received since the bombing. Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Herb Hawkins, wades through thousands of memos. On October 1st, a small tip catches his eye. A motel owner saw a white van leaving her motel in South Lake Tahoe an hour before the bomb was delivered. From witness statements, the FBI knows that the bomb was delivered in a white van. Hawkins thinks it's too close to be a coincidence.
When I picked that memo up, first it came in on the 800 line and no one looked at it. It's now a month old. And a suspicious vehicle leaving at 4:30 in the morning in a van needs to be covered.
Agents interview the motel owner who called in the tip. On August 26th at 4 a.m., she heard strange noises in the parking lot of the motel.
She awoke and went to a window and saw 2 to 3 individuals in white overalls trying to start a white van. She copied down the license number to ensure that it was the same license number on the registration card.
The next day, she called the FBI hotline. Agents learn the name on the hotel registration card is fake. They run the license plate number of the white van through the California Department of Motor Vehicles.
The information that came back from the DMV check on that license plate was that the vehicle was registered to a Mr. John Burgess, who was a resident of Clovis, California, which is right down by Fresno. Immediately, agents in the Fresno office went to pay a visit to Mr. Burgess and see why that van of his was up at Lake Tahoe and was being occupied by 3 people who appeared to be suspicious.
Burgess tells agents he doesn't know what they're talking about. He owns a white van, but his son usually drives it.
We were unable to gather very much information from Mr. Burgess other than the fact that his son had the vehicle and that his son might be involved in growing marijuana.
Agents interview Burgess's son in Fresno. They ask him what he was doing in Tahoe at 4 o'clock in the morning and why he used a fake name on his registration.
The young man told the investigators that he was up at Lake Tahoe looking for a place to grow marijuana. These agents realized that Lake Tahoe is at an elevation of 6,200 feet plus. It is not conducive whatsoever to growing marijuana because of the climatic conditions. So that was a pretty lame excuse.
Agents suspect Burgess's son is lying, but they don't know why. They don't think he's the bomber. At 18, they feel he's too young to construct a bomb this complex. Agents move on, searching for more viable leads.
The investigation into this bombing wore on and on and on. We interviewed well over 400 people, suspects in this bombing, throughout the country.
The bomb caused $3 million in damage. The people behind this must be stopped before they build another bomb. But agents are running out of leads. They have not heard from the bomber in months. By November, all but 16 agents are called home. The investigation is stalling. The FBI tries a new approach.
In the early part of 1981, we decided that we needed to up the ante for the reward. The reward was then increased to $500,000, from $250,000 to $500,000.
If a tight-knit group is responsible for the casino bombing, the FBI is betting that $500,000 in cash should be enough money to tear it apart.
We got our $500,000, and we got the news media, asked them to put this out. We had a small news conference, and it was prolific.
The FBI's gamble pays off.
And it wasn't but a very short time, maybe a few days, that our phone call came in. A young man called the Fresno office of the FBI and told them that we had been close, but we weren't on the right guy. He told us that it was not the young son of Mr. Burgess that we should be looking at, that it was in fact John Burgess Sr. himself who was responsible for this.
The tip makes sense. Although John Burgess didn't appear to be a likely suspect, agents have never resolved why his son was in the Tahoe area when the bomb was delivered. Within days, the entire investigation is moved from Stateline, Nevada to Fresno, California.
There was already a resident agency there, but we established another office there, and we brought in another 30, 40 agents to Fresno to begin our focus on John Burgess. I personally believed that this was our guy. There was a family situation involved. He had two sons who could have helped him and would not have participated in the reward. They would have kept their mouths shut like we expected. And I moved down to Fresno with great anticipation. I thought, this is it.
The FBI suspects John Burgess Sr. is the casino bomber, but they still need evidence linking him to the crime before they can make an arrest. A major casino lies in ruins, decimated by a massive bomb. The FBI suspects that John Burgess, a Fresno landscaping contractor, is the mastermind behind the devastating bomb. Special Agent Bill Jonke.
Our investigation of John Burgess Sr. included everything we can think of. We talked and interviewed his relatives, his friends. We surveilled him day and night. We checked his background. We checked people who had worked for him.
Burgess has an interesting past, according to Special Agent Herb Hawkins.
He was a Hungarian immigrant who had run afoul of the Soviets during the Hungarian Revolution. He went to a slave labor camp, exiled by the Soviets to that area, and had a great amount of work with explosives.
Through interviews, agents learn that Burgess is in financial trouble. In March 1980, the IRS filed suit against him for $34,000 in back taxes. He also owes Harvey's casino $15,000 in unpaid gambling markers.
His gaming losses that he told us about and that we had verified through records beforehand only led to make him a stronger suspect, because we always felt that whoever did this had a grudge against Harvey's casino, probably owed him money or had lost money, so it really fit perfectly into our bomber profile.
Agents feel John Burgess has the skill and the motive to bomb Harvey's casino. Now they need to prove it.
Myself and another agent were assigned to contact Mr. Burgess every single day 7 days a week. Just pay a visit to him and talk to him, get him to talk. Some days he'd yell and scream at us and wouldn't let us in. Other days he'd let us in and talk to us.
Burgess is very egotistical. He likes to talk about his successful landscaping business and his skill in electronics. The profilers were correct.
Things started to fall into place in terms of background. Now we needed to find out, there in Fresno, did he build the device there, and where did he buy the stuff to do this?
You have a bombing, one of the first things you do is you start looking around for thefts. Where could this stuff have come from? They could make it themselves, they could import it, they could steal it, they could buy it. You go to the ATF and pull all the theft reports.
Agents learned that 1,000 pounds of dynamite was stolen from a construction site near Burgess's home prior to the casino bombing.
So the puzzle started to come together, and it was time that we got people to start talking to us from inside the family.
Agents interview a member of Burgess's extended family who owns a large turkey farm near Fresno. They're particularly interested in the switches on a feeding mechanism Burgess constructed for the farm.
It was identical to the construction of the bomb. It was the same type of plastic material that he used, the same kind of soldering that he used.
Agents turn up the pressure on Burgess's sons and finally persuade them to talk.
Both kids in general told us the same story, that initially their father had asked them to participate in this extortion attempt. Both kids were not anxious to do it. They didn't want to do it, but they had loyalty to their father. And they at times provided some labor.
Burgess's son admits he did not grow marijuana. He made up the story to protect his father. The FBI learns that 2 employees in Burgess's landscaping business were the men who delivered the bomb to Harvey's casino. Burgess's sons say their father's girlfriend helped write the extortion letter. And they lead authorities to the place where their father hid the remainder of the stolen dynamite.
They also provided us with information about an additional explosives theft that occurred at basically the same site. And they told us where this explosive was buried. 600 pounds worth of dynamite was buried in a dry creek bed outside of Fresno. Mr. Burgess had told the boys he planned to build another bomb and put it somewhere else.
On August 16, 1981, John Burgess is arrested as he tries to leave his home. Burgess and his co-conspirators are charged with commercial extortion and conspiracy. Burgess's sons plead guilty to conspiracy and are sentenced to probation. On April 15, 1985, John Burgess is convicted and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The FBI lost a building, but the operation was a success. No one lost their lives, and the FBI captured the bomber before he could strike again.
So we learned a lot about processing large building bombing. What you have to do first, second, and third, where the pitfalls are, where the dangers are. Now, unfortunately, since then, all around the globe, we've had opportunities to practice the lessons and refine the lessons that we learned there.
Blazing fires, raging adrenaline, and total anarchy, all within the walls of a federal prison. FBI tactical teams and negotiators work around the clock, trying to avoid a small-scale war and keep nearly 100 hostages alive.
1980s, the Federal Penitentiary in Atlanta housed some of the country's most notorious prisoners. 1,800 Cubans fleeing Castro's regime. 400 were hardened criminals. 200 were insane. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Castro called them undesirables. The U.S. government called them detainees. In 1987, they staged a bloody revolt. Now the FBI and special operations teams must infiltrate a burning prison to stop the violence before it rages out of control.
Cuba, 1980. A plummeting economy and political unrest prompt Fidel Castro to allow Cuban citizens to leave the country. For the first time in history, the notorious dictator permits American boats to enter Cuba's Mariel Harbor. In a 5-month period, over 120,000 undocumented refugees flee the country, heading for Florida. 2,700 are considered criminals or mentally ill under U.S. law. The Attorney General instructs the Bureau of Prisons to find space for them in America's already overcrowded prison system. 1,000 Cuban refugees are sent to the Federal Detention Center in Oakdale, Louisiana. Nearly 1,400 are transported to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. For 7 years, the U.S. and Cuban governments negotiate to send the criminals and mentally ill refugees back to Cuba. On November 20th, 1987, the State Department strikes a treaty with Cuba. Over 2,700 Cuban detainees will be sent back. Within 24 hours, Cuban detainees in both prisons get news of the decision. In Oakdale, Louisiana, 1,000 of them riot, taking 28 prison guards hostage. But at the Atlanta Penitentiary, all is quiet. Warden Joe Petrovsky.
There was a trust between the detainees and the correctional officers, and that trust was basically the treatment that the detainees got from the correctional officers.
Early Monday morning, 3 days after the treaty is signed, prison employee Ted Manier arrives at work. He notices an eerie silence.
There were hardly any inmates in the breakfast area. And normally it would be full of inmates were making a lot of noise and talking, and there was hardly anybody in there, so it was really quiet, unusually quiet.
On the first floor of the Prison Industries building, detainees make mattresses. On the surface, it looks like business as usual. But in an instant, detainees overpower their guards and ignite fires. On the third floor of the Industries building, Manier and his supervisor oversee a furniture-making shop. In a matter of minutes, the riot spreads to the rest of the floors.
It sounded like a roar, and it was coming up the stairwell. They got the door down, and they just came running in, and they had these hoods over their head, like they were made out of gray T-shirts or gray sweatshirts, and they just had holes poked out for their eyes so they could see.
Manier tries to report the emergency, but he is attacked by one of the rioters.
And I don't know if he was trying to hit me or just the telephone out of my hand. He knocked the phone out of my hand that went across the room.
Prison employees are facing their worst nightmare. Although they are well aware of the risks, they never thought it would happen to them.
But we did realize there was a threat, but I guess you think you can control it. When you work with inmates, you get used to them, and sometimes you forget who they really are.
The guards and factory workers are helpless. Unarmed and outnumbered, they face rioters carrying homemade weapons. The staff member notifies Warden Petrovsky of the crisis.
Inside the wall, nobody carried weapons. The inmates always vastly outnumbered the staff. So if we had weapons in there, we could lose those weapons. The only weapons that we had was weapons in the tower.
Petrovsky alerts the FBI and the prison's regional director.
I try to give him an assessment of exactly what transpired and brought him up to date.
As fire spreads throughout the industries building, the detainees force the guards and employees into a tool cage and lock the door.
We kind of thought that unless there was some miracle, that we would probably just burn up because there's no way to get out of one of the cages.
The riot spreads throughout the entire penitentiary complex. Enraged detainees capture guards, taking keys as they take hostages. They begin to release the regular prison population from their cells. The riot is beyond containment. The detainees now control most of the central buildings. Rioters attempt to gain access to the main cell block, but guards lock down the sally port just in time. As flames and smoke engulf the massive prison complex, nearly 100 guards and employees are trapped inside. Built at the turn of the century, the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary is the largest penitentiary in the United States.
It was a fortress inside that was surrounded by a wall. It raised from the ground approximately 40 feet, and the width on the top of the wall was approximately 3 yards wide. So it was a massive, massive wall.
Show me what you got.
The penitentiary is built on 300 acres of land, with 28 acres of property inside the walls.
Okay, well, we've got guards.
Warden Petrovsky needs to figure out exactly where his people are located inside the complex.
We had staff members in 11 towers that had very good observation over the entire outside compound, who logged those employees that they recognized in those areas. We started a list of the officers that we thought were hostages.
Ted Manier and his colleagues are trapped inside an equipment cage in the burning industries building. Several rioters try to convince the Cuban detainees guarding the cage to unlock the door.
They were trying to talk the guard into opening the door because they wanted to get us out and kill us or do whatever. So the guard had to tell them that they couldn't open the door, and occasionally they would push one off for getting a little wrestle.
But the raging fire threatens to destroy the building. So the rioters are forced to move their hostages to another part of the prison complex. The only route takes them across the yard in clear view of the towers. A tower guard spots what he believes are detainees threatening prison employees.
There was a guy that was up ahead of me, and he got hit. I remember seeing him. He was a Cuban. He got hit right behind the ear.
One of the hostage takers is killed, and 5 others are wounded.
I was getting worried because the bullets were going pretty close around where we were.
Chaos reigns as guards and detainees run for cover.
They ran us across to the corner of the building where they couldn't shoot at us. And that time they took us in the chapel.
Detainees force their hostages into a small room and lock them inside. Less than an hour after the riots begin, FBI agents from the Atlanta field office arrive at the penitentiary. The FBI has jurisdiction over criminal matters in all federal prisons. Warden Petrovsky briefs Weldon Kennedy, the special agent in charge.
The first thing that I wanted to accomplish was to find out how many hostages had been taken, how many might be injured, what was the threat to those people who were in fact taken hostage. All of these people were like on an emotional high. I mean, they'd been prisoners for literally 8-10 years. Some of them serving life sentences, and now they're free to roam around the prison. It was like a holiday.
This is the area where they...
Agent Leon Blakeney heads the Atlanta FBI SWAT team. Agent Blakeney appears in silhouette to protect his identity.
Nobody really knew what area that the inmates controlled, and they really didn't know how many hostages were taken.
You had 2,500 people housed in that institution.
Here's the administration.
There were people running around all over the place, and quite frankly, it was chaos.
Chaos that had already turned deadly. As agents Kennedy and Blakeney developed their plan to retake the prison, they received critical intelligence from two sources. From FBI agents posted outside the walls of the prison complex, and from prisoners inside the walls who don't want any part of the riot.
We began to learn who the hostages might be, where the detainees were holding up, how many were there, what kind of weapons they might have.
The detainees have taken the guards' radios, compromising prison communications. Agents and guards switch to a secure frequency.
2 white males and 2 black males.
The situation is grim. Negotiations will be critical to resolving the standoff. Special Agent D. Rosario, an FBI negotiator, opens up a dialogue with the rioters.
Unreasonable demands are being made. The hostage takers want things done now. And that's why it is so important to try to bring them down to a level where they can be reasonable. Can you negotiate with people at that very high emotional level? Generally speaking, no. So we had to give it time.
The rioters are emotionally charged, angry over the shooting death of a detainee.
This theme came up time and again. You killed one of ours. You had no reason to, and you killed him. And they wanted me to see the bodies, so I had the body brought out to where we were. I looked at the body. They wanted me to get emotionally involved with them. And these 4 that originally came out to talk to me really were only speaking for themselves. They were not speaking on behalf of the 1,400 that were in there.
In the command post, Warden Petrovsky receives a frantic call from 16 employees who have barricaded themselves in cell block E. E block is home to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary's most dangerous criminals.
These particular group of inmates were locked away in E to keep them from harming someone.
If the detainees get into cell block E and free the inmates, the lives of all 16 employees will be in danger. The E cell block is also home to the prison system's most notorious inmate, Thomas Silverstein.
A number of people in the Bureau of Prisons told me that he singularly was the toughest prisoner they believed that the Bureau of Prisons had ever housed or had in their custody. He was just an absolute animal, and he hated everything to do with the Bureau of Prisons or any of their staff.
Silverstein was incarcerated in 1975 for a bank robbery. Years later, he was sentenced to multiple life terms for fatally stabbing an inmate and a prison guard.
Thomas Silverstein was cold and he was a killer. He had two things on his mind: to escape from jail because his crimes were such where he was going to die in jail. And the other objective was to kill people. It was as simple as that.
The guards in cell block E are in grave danger. Special Agent Kennedy works with the FBI SWAT team to come up with a plan to rescue them.
The SWAT analysis was that they believed that they could go over the wall out of view of the rioting detainees and retrieve those people out of that building successfully.
The SWAT team will need ladders to get over the 40-foot-high wall. Special Agent Blakeney calls on the Atlanta Fire Department and a National Guard helicopter crew to help carry out the plan.
We put a helicopter up on the opposite side of the prison to attract their attention, and at least we have some diversion.
Chief, here's the situation. We've got a hostage crisis.
7 hours after the riot began, the FBI SWAT team launches a daring mission to rescue 16 prison employees without endangering the lives of nearly 100 hostages.
Okay, listen, we need to put a truck up on the southwest corner with the ladder. Everybody got it?
7 hours after a riot breaks out at Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, an FBI SWAT team launches a mission to rescue 16 employees barricaded in one of the prison's cell blocks. FBI Special Agent Weldon Kennedy knows that if the rescue attempt is seen by rioting Cuban detainees, it could spell disaster.
They would not hesitate to kill hostages if it became apparent to them that we were going to try to retake the prison or retake any part of it.
After scaling the wall, the FBI SWAT team approaches cell block E, home to the prison's most dangerous inmates.
Guard, come out, guard! Guard, now!
SWAT rushes the prison employees out of the building.
Keep your head down. Identify yourself when you get down there.
Across the prison yard, 27 employees, afraid for their safety, have barricaded themselves inside the prison hospital. Frustrated, they watch as their colleagues are escorted to safety. FBI SWAT team leader Leon Blakeney.
You know, they're screaming, frantic, you know, come and get us, come and get us.
The director of the Bureau of Prisons urges the FBI SWAT team to go back for the hospital employees.
The SWAT personnel informed me that there was a 100% probability that they would be detected going over the wall to try to effect a rescue of the hospital people.
We can't protect the other hostages that are being held in other parts of the prison. And my concern was if in fact we were observed, then they would start killing the other employees.
Blakeney wants to rescue the hospital staff, but knows it's a risk he cannot afford. The detainees break into cell block E and release the inmates. Vicious criminals run free, including Thomas Silverstein, a ruthless killer. As darkness falls, 3 buildings have been consumed by fire. Nearly 100 guards and employees have been taken hostage or have barricaded themselves inside the prison. Prison employee Ted Atsuki is being held inside a room in the prison's chapel.
So a man came up to the window, and he wasn't a Cuban. And the guy beside me said, "That's Silverstein." And he came inside, and he had a flashlight, and he started shining his flashlight. He shined the light on me, and said, "Don't I know you?" I told him, no. I said, I've never seen you before. And he said, you don't know who I am? He looked worse than anything I've ever seen in any type of movie or anything. And when you look at him, you know he isn't a normal. There's something strange about him. He's really scary.
Detainees finally distract Silverstein and he leaves without harming the hostages. On day 2 of the standoff, FBI Tactical Commander Danny Coulson arrives at the prison.
You could hear this huge roar. It was like a million bumblebees. You could almost feel the energy of those rioting prisoners.
Coulson started the FBI's hostage rescue team, an elite counterterrorism group in 1982. The HRT is law enforcement's equivalent to the Navy SEALs or the Army's Delta Force.
The only unit in the United States that has a sophisticated explosive or thermal breaching capability is the FBI's hostage rescue team.
But the HRT is already tied up, handling the riot at Oakdale.
So I was going to a very difficult tactical assignment without the team I was used to commanding.
Despite not having the hostage rescue team available to him, Coulson must still develop a full-scale tactical rescue plan. He faces several obstacles.
A prison is built to keep bad guys in. You have barred doors, you have steel gates. Well, these same type of things keep a rescue force from getting in. I needed help from the military, primarily from the Delta Force.
Delta Force is the Army's Special Operations Unit, but using them at the prison would be illegal.
A posse comitatus law was passed right after the Civil War, and that law prevents the military from being involved actively with their personnel in civil law enforcement.
Barring approval from the White House, the FBI must rely solely on civilian law enforcement. Weldon Kennedy assembles over 400 SWAT members at the prison.
We had SWAT teams from all around the country, Chicago, New York, as well as, of course, the immediate surrounding area.
We figured that based on the capability we had, we were probably maybe an hour away from getting in to rescue the hostages. We were all concerned that they started killing hostages. We were helpless to get in there. And that's one of the reasons that Rosario and the other negotiators were working so hard to try to get somebody to talk to calm the situation down.
But the negotiations are not going well. None of the rioters Rosario has spoken with has enough power to influence the detainees. The negotiators need a different approach.
We could be here for a very long time unless we come up with a group of people in there among the detainees that can speak basically for, if not all of them, for the majority.
Rosario asks prison employees which detainees command the most respect.
Files of these people were opened to us, and we looked at several of them, and we decided on 5 or 6 men. We went to the grating and called them by name, and they came to the grating, and we invited them to come over to our side and sit down at a table with us and talk with us.
The detainees agree to talk with negotiators.
And we began our first serious conversations in terms of how can we resolve this? What is it that you're looking for? The number one demand that they had was that ultimately the Immigration and Naturalization Service conduct individual hearings for each and every one of them to remain in the United States.
It's a straightforward request. Rosario agrees to pass it on to the Department of Justice. As the meeting ends, the negotiator uses a bit of psychology to help solidify the group's standing as leaders within the prison.
We decided to give these men the mail that had accumulated since before the riot began.
In the penitentiary, daily mail is an important link to the outside world.
They went back in there, and we could literally hear the shouting of glee when these guys showed up with 2 bags full of mail. We believe it created in the minds of the others that these guys could get things done for them. And that's where it began. After that, we kept asking for the same men.
Rosario is beginning to make progress, but negotiations go slowly. In the prison hospital, 27 trapped employees are out of time. Detainees are trying to break down the door of the hospital with a battering ram. The employees call Warden Petrovsky in the command center. Warden Petrovsky relays the information to Weldon Kennedy. Detainees could break through the hospital doors at any moment.
We had 27 people in there, and there was concern that once the hospital was taken over, they might be injured or even killed. So the ram is going, we can hear it as a matter of fact, banging the metal doors of the prison.
Bureau of Prison officials worry about what could happen if detainees get access to the drugs and narcotics stored in the hospital.
What about right here?
Weldon Kennedy asks HRT Commander Danny Coulson for a second assessment.
I said, yeah, we can get them out. We can go over the wall. We can defend the area with a perimeter and slide them out over the walls, and we're out of there.
Coulson's biggest concern is that the detainees are watching news coverage of the riots.
Inmates were watching TV to see what we were doing as much as they could. And they could very well believe that a rescue of the entire prison was underway, and then they could start executing the hostages.
Hospital workers are moments away from becoming hostages, or worse.
So here we have a huge dilemma. Do we go in and take those people out of the hospital and save them, or do we let them be taken hostage?
Kennedy decides a rescue is too risky.
My decision was based on all the information that I had. We will not go for the rescue. I will not authorize the rescue.
And when he went back in and announced it to the Bureau of Prisons, I remember one Bureau of Prisons official storming past me and looking at me and said, if those are FBI agents, you'd go get them. And I said, no, he wouldn't.
Weldon Kennedy wonders if he has just signed a death warrant for 27 innocent people. For 2 days, a riot rages at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. Dozens of Cuban detainees now control the prison. 27 Bureau of Prison employees are trapped in the prison hospital. Weldon Kennedy, special agent in charge of the FBI's Atlanta field office, makes a tough decision.
If we entered the penitentiary, if we tried to retake it, there was a threat they were going to immediately kill them all.
Kennedy decides not to launch a rescue mission. 2 hours after the decision, communication is lost with the employees in the prison hospital.
It's the warden. Pick up if you hear me.
I knew that if anything happened to any one of those 27 people, that I would forever live with that as being the person responsible.
Guards stationed at the prison towers gather intelligence as detainees move hostages across the prison yard. One guard calls the FBI command post with a disturbing development. A group of detainees is dragging acetylene tanks into a basement where they can access the prison's utility tunnels. Danny Coulson is the FBI's tactical commander at the scene.
They might be able to bring those tanks and get enough of them underneath our command post where the tunnels ran and cause an explosion, which would have decimated the command post and maybe have allowed them to escape.
Coulson and the FBI SWAT team prepare to go down into the tunnels.
The tunnels were designed for two purposes. One is all the utilities went through the tunnels, the steam pipes, the electrical pipes, and they were big tunnels. There were also ventilation tunnels that started big enough for a man to walk in standing up and ended up only a few inches high.
Coulson and SWAT team leader Leon Blakeney have no idea what they will encounter once they are inside. Prison maps aren't reliable, and communication with agents above ground is not possible. As the team makes their way through the underground maze of pipes, they encounter a group of detainees. Leon Blakeney.
Once we got in the tunnels, we discovered then that in fact the Cubans were in there.
And oftentimes we'd come in very close proximity to them, within 10 feet of them. There would be a bunch of them, and we'd confront them, and fortunately, every time they'd turn around and run.
The SWAT team is unable to find the acetylene tanks in the vast underground system, but they are convinced the detainees are exploring the tunnels for a possible escape route.
We decided that the tunnel system was a real threat to the successful resolution of the crisis.
Ultimately, we were able to station SWAT teams down there. The Chicago SWAT team handled one part of the tunnel system, and the Washington Field Office SWAT team handled another part of the tunnel system.
On day 3 of the standoff, Danny Coulson receives intelligence from agents with high-powered binoculars positioned around the prison. The detainees have moved nearly all the hostages to a building known as the American Dorm. Coulson begins to formulate a tactical rescue plan.
What do you think what can it...
Outside the prison, crowds gather. Families of the hostages, the prison guards, and even the detainees wait for information about their loved ones. The media covers breaking news from the penitentiary.
There was hundreds of media people there. There were networks, there was local TV. They established a tent city right across the street from the prison.
A single reporter and a simple error threatened to bring the standoff to a violent end. Special Agent D. Rosario.
The New York SWAT team was coming off shift, and the Chicago SWAT team was coming on shift, and they passed each other right at the steps of the administration building. And it looked impressive because there was two very large groups of armed men, all dressed in black.
A local reporter in Atlanta is watching this and sees these 40 or 50 men dressed in SWAT gear going up the front steps, and jumps to the conclusion and says so on live TV that, well, there they go. Looks like the FBI is going to retake control of the prison.
When the detainees see the media report, they take immediate action.
They brought several hostages out to the yard. And for the benefit of our cameras, so we could see them, they brought these hostages out and they poured gasoline over them. And then they took their cigarette lighters out and began clicking while literally screaming at us, "If you want to assault us, go ahead. As soon as you do, we're setting fire to these men."
Without knowing it, a young journalist may have just made a mistake that could cost the lives of nearly 100 innocent people. At the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, FBI agents negotiate with Cuban detainees who have taken over the prison. The lives of nearly 100 hostages hang in the balance. On day 3 of the standoff, a journalist's error ignites a crisis. FBI Tactical Commander Danny Coulson.
All along, our negotiators have been telling the Cubans that we weren't coming in, that we wanted to negotiate and wanted them to surrender, and now a reporter is saying we're coming in.
The erroneous media report makes Special Agent D. Rosario's job even tougher as he negotiates for the lives of the hostages.
We had brought them down to such a reasonable level of emotion, and when they thought that the FBI was about to assault, they literally lost it.
We came literally within a few heartbeats of losing the hostages right then and there.
We sent everybody to what we call phase line green, which is the last position you are in before you do a rescue. It was like a spark that was about to ignite this terrible inferno of energy we had built up there.
I had to convince them that no such assault was going to take place, and that, you know, if things were going so well and so positive, why would we even think about assaulting them?
After 3 tense hours, the rioters agree to continue negotiations and spare the hostages.
We're just lucky that our negotiators were able to calm them down and we didn't have any loss of life.
For Coulson, the close call is a warning sign that the standoff could explode into a full-scale riot with very little provocation. At the end of day 3, he obtains presidential approval to deploy Delta Force in a civilian crisis. The Special Operations Team arrives in Atlanta disguised as FBI agents.
There were 3 things that I desperately needed from them. The first was their breaching capability. They had all the breaching capability that would be necessary to get back into that prison to do a dynamic rescue. They had the ability to use explosives to blow steel doors down or blow locks out. They had the ability to use thermal devices to cut in an instant through steel and cable. The second thing I wanted was their sniper capability. When we went into that prison, if we had to go in, I wanted the very best snipers I could find doing cover for my men as they went in. The other thing is they have tremendous medical capability.
They travel with a complete hospital. They set up with the doctors, nurses, emergency equipment, the latest state-of-the-art everything.
If Delta Force or FBI teams engage the detainees in combat, the military hospital is prepared to treat any injury.
They can bring their doctors right in with us. They can pop a chest and do open heart surgery right there in the premises if necessary.
For the next several days, Delta Force snipers keep the detainees under constant surveillance. The rioters are working 24 hours a day, making weapons by the thousands.
There was all kinds of steel inside the prison, and they were very resourceful with the equipment. They ground weapons into spears. Each one of them must have had at least 2 weapons.
Delta Force sets up surveillance cameras all over the complex to track the movement of the detainees. Agents look for ways to get closer to the areas where the hostages are being held. If the Cuban detainees decide to kill the hostages, the tactical team must be able to launch an assault on a moment's notice.
We've got 2 people guarding the American dorm.
This is not something where you play a video game and after it's over, you hit your reset button and everybody's alive again. You're talking about the lives of human beings here, and you have a tremendous responsibility to try to get those people out.
Coulson and Blakeney go back into the tunnels underneath the prison. One of the tunnels leads to the prison's electrical room. It's located right outside the American dorm, where most of the hostages are held.
We were literally on the other side of the window from inmates that were right across the walkway from where the hostages were being held. By doing that, we moved our response time from half an hour to 10 seconds. It was a tremendous leap in our capability at that point.
With the FBI SWAT teams and Delta Force in place, they will be in a better position to protect the hostages if negotiations break down.
Until they start harming a hostage, there's no reason for us to try to gain forcible entry to save these people. We therefore will wait as long as it takes.
The rioters have enough food to survive for up to a year. The day after Thanksgiving, they erect a Christmas tree on the roof of the building.
That was very disheartening to us. Maybe they didn't intend it psychologically to be that way. We interpret it as we are going to be here through Christmas.
On day 8 of the crisis, prison guards stationed in the tunnel hear the sound of a drill. One guard recognizes the voice of Thomas Silverstein, the most vicious inmate in the federal prison system. They think Silverstein is searching for a way out.
We knew he would absolutely kill a hostage if it would help him escape.
Weldon Kennedy asks Danny Coulson to go back into the tunnels to apprehend Silverstein.
So we walked down the tunnel and we did a tactical formation going down the tunnel. We had lights on our weapons. Suddenly we noticed there was water on the floor, and then the water started getting deeper, and it was over the tops of our shoes and then over our ankles and up to our knees. And what we finally realized is that that tunnel was actually flooded.
The water flooding the tunnels had been dumped by National Guard helicopters to fight the fires. Looking further into the tunnel, he can see water fills it to the ceiling. He knows there is no way Thomas Silverstein can be in there.
And what they were hearing was there were tubes, ventilation tubes, that were above the water line. So the guards were actually hearing his voice, but we knew he wasn't going to get out.
Still, Coulson knows that Silverstein is as dangerous inside the prison as he is on the outside.
He was a sociopath, and he'd proven he would commit murder. So had he done that, had he attempted to harm a guard or anybody else in there, it would have caused us to have to go in and launch a rescue we didn't want to have to launch. And then again, we were faced with significant loss of life.
Knowing Thomas Silverstein is such a dangerous wild card, FBI negotiator D. Rosario must convince the detainees to turn him over.
United States, okay?
I emphasized and kept re-emphasizing the fact that Tommy Silverstein could become a very grave liability to the Cuban detainees and to their cause and to what they were trying to attain. I was told that they would think about it.
Rosario tells the rioters that until Silverstein is back behind bars, the hostages are in grave danger. As long as the vicious killer roams free, the standoff could come to a sudden and violent end. More than a week into the intense standoff with Cuban detainees at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary, FBI negotiators worry that a dangerous American prisoner could jeopardize a peaceful end to the conflict.
What I suggested to them was that at some point or another, it would be in your best interest to turn Tommy Silverstein over to us.
Special Agent D. Rosario tries to convince the rioters that Silverstein is a serious threat to prison employees who are being held hostage. The American inmate is jeopardizing their position in the negotiations. A short time later, a large group of detainees appears at the Sallyport gate of the main cell block.
And there was about 100 Cubans screaming, waving their sabers in the air. And I could see they had Silverstein. And in the midst of all these screaming Cubans, they literally threw Silverstein at us.
Detainees tell agents how they captured Silverstein.
So they gained access to the pharmacy. They took some narcotic. They put it in a can of fruit cocktail, which he was known to like, and fed him fruit cocktail laced liberally with this drug, which in effect knocked him out.
The FBI viewed Silverstein's capture as an act of good faith.
That told us a lot. They don't want to hurt the hostages.
It showed the negotiators that these Cubans were responsible. They were willing to do things to cooperate with us in order to reach a common goal, which is a great step in any negotiation process.
On December 1st, a separate riot at Louisiana's Oakdale Penitentiary is resolved. The Cuban detainees incarcerated at Oakdale agree to release their hostages if the INS will review their cases.
The government of the United States, through the voice of the Attorney General, told them, you know, it's not unreasonable to give you a hearing.
Rosario offers the Atlanta detainees the same deal. The hostage takers have gotten exactly what they want, but still, negotiations stall. Audio surveillance reveals the rioters think the FBI will not use deadly force to remove them from the prison, that they would have a fighting chance to overpower federal forces.
The Cubans thought that the FBI and the other assets would come in with nightsticks and batons and just duke it out.
The next day, Coulson decides to send the hostage takers an indelible message. The detainee agrees to talk with Coulson.
And he said, I need to go to the restroom. So I said, wait right here. So I went around the barrier and I got the Marshall's SOG team and the New York City SWAT team. I got them all up and I said, put on all your gear and line up along the walls and look mean. And he walked around that barricade, and when he walked down that corridor, he literally jumped off the ground. I said, this is not going to be a nightstick duel with your swords. We're going to use deadly force.
The rioters agree to the terms of the surrender. On day 12 of the standoff, the Cuban detainees release their hostages.
I will never, ever forget those guys coming through that sally port and walking right by me, and the look of relief. They were haggard and they were tired and they were worn out, but this great sense of relief, and they're all smiling ear to ear.
When we finally walked out with hostages, not one of them having been harmed in any way, we regarded that as a huge success.
After 12 intense days, the Atlanta prison riot is over.
One of the most important things, it sort of focused the American public on the plight of the Cubans. And I think that was important. They did have a story to tell. They just told it in the wrong way.
After the riots, all detainees are granted an INS hearing. Some are released. Others with criminal records or mental disabilities are repatriated back to Cuba. The rest remain in prison.
In Boston, a police call becomes deadly. The gunman escapes. But Boston police and the FBI vow to find him. Uncovering his past, they navigate a trail of criminal connections, false names, and hidden danger to make him pay for his brutal attack on the law.
A criminal who kills a police officer wages war on society. In 1987, such a criminal vanished after shooting 2 Boston officers, one fatally. He had a history of violence against cops and the protection of a group of outlaws as he fled across state and national borders. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Finding this elusive cop killer meant breaking his co-conspirators before he slipped away forever.
Boston, Massachusetts. The city's Back Bay district is an upscale area, unaccustomed to violent crime.
At 12:30 a.m. on October 2nd, 1987, in one Back Bay apartment building, Meredith Falcone and her cousin were locked in an argument. He had threatened her, and she was trying to get him to leave. She feared he wouldn't go away, but instead grow angrier. She called 911.
911, this call is recorded. What is your emergency?
The emergency operator dispatched 2 police vehicles to the scene. Within minutes, the first squad car arrived at the apartment building. It seemed a fairly routine call for officers George Torres and Chris Rogers. They rang Meredith Falcone on the intercom. But there was a problem with her front door release buzzer, according to Officer Torres.
She came over the speaker, the intercom, and stated to us that her buzzer doesn't work, to ring somebody else's to let us in. In the background, while she was talking, we could hear some commotion, so we knew that there was something going on inside the apartment.
Then 2 more officers, William Kennedy and Roy Sergi, arrived on the scene. So far, none of the tenants had responded to buzz them in. So the officers decided to split up.
We took the standard procedure that 2 of us would cover the back and 2 would stay in front. At that point, Officer Rogers and myself proceeded to the back.
Torres and Rogers searched for another way into the building.
We look into a little alcove behind the building, and we see a male up against the side of the wall, sort of trying to hide.
Perhaps it was the cousin the caller had mentioned.
I asked him to come towards me to find out what's going on.
The fence's gate was padlocked.
Over the fence.
I told him to climb over the fence towards my side. As he put his feet on the ground, he attempted to flee. At that point, I grabbed him and I started the pat-down procedure. Once I put my hands on his shoulders, he shoved me. Gut instinct told me that he had a gun.
Torres was hit. The man kept firing at Officer Rogers, then chased Torres. Rogers couldn't get a clean shot. By then, Kennedy and Sergi had come to the side. Officer Sergi had been shot too. Though injured, Torres tried to assist Roy Sergi. Kennedy chased the suspect for several blocks, but he had disappeared into the Boston night.
As I knelt over him and leaned over, I noticed that there was blood coming out of my left arm and the left side of my chest. And at that point, I knew that I was hit several times.
Rogers called for backup and emergency personnel.
I felt the pain, the burning sensation. I started to gasp for air a little. At that point, I knew that something had gone through my lung.
Boston Dispatch put out the call that all police dread hearing. Officers down. Every available unit responded. In a matter of minutes, the normally quiet Back Bay district was swarming with emergency vehicles. Both critically wounded, Officers Roy Sergi and George Torres were rushed to the hospital. Detectives interviewed Officers Rogers and Kennedy. They explained what happened and said the assailant was an Asian male about 30 years old, of average height and with a muscular build. The description of the gunman differed from that of Meredith Falcone's cousin, the man who had started the domestic disturbance in the building. Officer Kennedy, a trained sniper, felt certain he shot the gunman as he fled, but no blood was found in that area. The injured officers had sustained 3 bullet wounds each, including life-threatening chest wounds. They were losing blood fast. Medical personnel struggled to stabilize them for emergency surgery. At the crime scene, forensic technicians began processing the area where the gunfight took place. It was littered with shell casings, bullet fragments, and blood. Detailing the placement of each item would help reconstruct exactly who fired when. Blocks away, they recovered an ammunition clip from a handgun, believed to be dropped by the gunman. It was a 15-round clip from a 9mm Sig Sauer semi-automatic, and it was empty. If it was the gunman's, they hoped to find fingerprints or some other forensic evidence that might lead them to him. In the lab, they would lift one partial print, but it was not enough for any comparison. Police issued a citywide alert for the suspect. They searched all of the Back Bay district and beyond. But that night, they found no sign of the gunman. Sergeant Detective James Fong of Boston's D14 station was named lead detective.
When I first heard that Roy Sergi and Joe Charez were shot, I was actually really surprised and shocked that someone would shoot Boston police officers.
Though worried about his colleagues, Detective Fong still had to do his job.
The crime scene is still a crime scene regardless of whether a police officer or a civilian involved, and you have to take everything step by step.
He first wanted to determine where the assailant had come from. Then he might be able to identify him.
I had already been given information that the individual who was involved in the shooting had come out from the back gate. We then, myself and other officers, went and investigated that area.
Inside the gated fence, they noticed a large air conditioning unit. On closer inspection, Detective Fong discovered shoe prints on the cover of the unit.
The footprints that we recovered at the scene were something consistent with where the officers, George Torres and Christopher Rogers, said that they had seen the individual.
Directly above the air conditioner was a window from a third-floor hallway.
I believe the footprints got on the cover by an individual jumping from the third-floor window onto the air-conditioned cover.
This suggested that the suspect was likely connected to the building somehow. Detectives wanted to interview the roughly 60 residents of the building. Fong decided to start with those of Asian descent.
The assailant was an Asian male, and I tried to put 2 to 2 together, thinking that maybe he did come from that building and maybe he was related or did reside at that building.
A forensic artist had created a composite sketch of the suspect based on the officers' descriptions. But the residents didn't recognize the man. Although they had heard the commotion and gunshots the night before, they could offer little help.
I interviewed all of the Asian occupants that were known to have resided in that building at that time of this incident, and none of them were able to give me any good solid leads. Along with
Other residents couldn't help either.
I spoke to most of the tenants, and they didn't even know their next door neighbor because of the fact that it's a short-term lease type apartment. They were only there for a few days, a few weeks.
It seemed a dead end. At the hospital, the wounded officers were in critical but stable condition. Investigators were frustrated they had no leads on the man who shot them. Then, 6 days after the shooting, detectives returned to the apartment building to check out a new lead.
We had received a call from the manager who stated to us that there was an Asian male that had lived there and that she forgot to tell us about, and that they had gone in to check on his well-being because they hadn't seen him for that week.
The manager believed the place had been abandoned.
Boston Police, search warrant.
The tenant's name was Mark Terra. He loosely fit the description of the gunman.
Clear.
Earl, can you come on inside here?
A building employee pointed out a box of ammunition they discovered when they had come in to check on Terra.
Can you take a picture of that and bag it?
Technicians collected the bullets, noting they were 9mm, the same caliber as the casings and fragments found at the crime scene. In the lab, the bullets would be compared against those used in the shooting. Detective Fong checked the space where a ceiling tile was moved to the side. It was clear, but something might have been hidden there before. The apartment was spare and neat, suggesting the tenant might have served time in the military or prison. The technicians scoured the entire apartment for additional evidence.
We recovered a number of items: clothing, personal effects, and ammunition, and fingerprints and hair samples.
But nothing indicated where Terra had gone. Checking the name, they learned Mark Terra had no police record. But Detective Fong got a copy of his rental contract. On it, Terra listed a previous address and phone number in San Francisco. Detective Fong called the number and spoke with a man named Leon Perry.
Hi, this is Detective Fong with the Boston Police Department.
Perry was reluctant to talk,
I'm calling relative to an investigation.
and he denied knowing Terra.
The individual that I spoke to was very evasive. In fact, I identified myself as a police officer with the city of Boston who was investigating a shooting of 2 police officers. The individual then became very defensive, stating to me that he did not want to help the police department.
Perry seemed suspicious, but police had nothing that connected him to the shooting. Fong had San Francisco police run a check on Perry, and they reported he had no local record there. Boston police received a copy of Mark Terra's California driver's license photo.
George, I'm going to show you some photos here.
They brought it to the one officer who got the best look at the shooter, George Torres.
This picture just jumped out right at me. And I stated to him, that's the guy that shot us. Anxiety and fear ran through my body. Anxiety knowing that we have an ID on the suspect, and fear because he's still out on the street.
With a suspect identified, the Boston police held a press conference 1 week after the shootout.
Based on the information available to me and to our investigators, which I cannot disclose, we have an unusually violent person, and quite frankly, it's scary.
They believed they knew who the gunman was. Now, they had to find him. In Boston, a shootout left 2 police officers critically wounded. Suspect Mark Terra had disappeared. Investigators discovered his last known address was in San Francisco and asked their counterparts in the Bay Area to help.
recognize their assignments?
They sent the San Francisco police wanted posters of Terra and asked them to have their officers look out for him in case he returned there. After a morning roll call, Sergeant Greg Lynch checked the wanted poster clipboard.
On the clipboard was a flyer regarding a suspect who had shot 2 Boston police officers. I knew I had seen the individual, I just couldn't immediately place where I had seen him.
Then Sergeant Lynch remembered an off-duty incident that had occurred 6 weeks earlier. In August of that year, as he was leaving a movie theater with a friend, he had spotted a man on the street carrying a handgun.
My first thought was he may have been a police officer, but when I looked at him, the feeling I got is he was not a police officer, especially when he turned and he looked at me intently. After the light turned green, he walked across the street. I told my friend to go to the phone, dial 911, tell him who I was, where I was, and that I had a man with a gun.
Lynch's instinct told him the man was a criminal. He followed the man, though he couldn't stop him from driving away. Sergeant Lynch did get the man's Texas license plate number.
Once I realized that the man in the Boston flyer was the man I saw at the movie house, that's when I started my investigation in acquiring the information that I had called in back in August, including the license plate number, and that came back to a David Terra.
Though the suspect used the first name Mark in Boston, it was the same man. His record was clean, and his registration listed a post office box in Brownsville, Texas. Lynch forwarded the information to investigators in Boston. In turn, Boston police immediately contacted authorities in Brownsville and asked for their assistance. A detective from the Brownsville police checked the post office box and found the suspect's street address. He went to the apartment building where the suspect had lived.
I'd like to ask you a few questions about one of your tenants. Okay.
The detective showed the apartment manager a photo of the man known as Mark, or David Terra. The manager recognized the photo, but he didn't know him by either of those names. He knew him as Ted Atsuki. Atsuki had moved out months ago, and the manager had no idea where he had gone.
If you think of anything else that can help me, please give me a call. Thank you very much.
The Brownsville detective ran a check on the name Ted Atsuki and learned that was the suspect's true name. The names Mark and David Terra were aliases. Atsuki had an extensive criminal record, including a 1979 Texas bank heist preceded by the armed takeover of a small-town police station. In March of 1979, Atsuki overpowered the 2 officers manning the Los Fresnos police station, then took out their communications center. With the police neutralized, he walked across the street and robbed the local bank of $70,000. Atsuki was eventually convicted of the robbery and served 7 years of a 15-year sentence in Leavenworth Prison. Within a year of his release, he was wanted again for violating parole by leaving the state of Texas.
Criminal investigations, please.
The Brownsville detective called Boston and offered to send Atsuki's fingerprints.
Brownsville, Texas. Got some information on a active case you got up there.
11 days had passed since the shooting of the officers in Boston, and the city was still on edge. By that time, police technicians there had lifted a single usable print from the suspect's rental contract. They compared it against Ted Atsuki's print sent from Texas. Checking comparison points, they made a match. Investigators were sure Atsuki was the gunman who had shot officers George Torres and Roy Sergi. They also believed he had left Massachusetts. Boston police contacted the FBI for assistance, and the case was assigned to Special Agent Jay Fallon of the Boston Field Office.
With the probable cause that he had fled the state to avoid being arrested, the FBI obtained an unlawful flight to avoid prosecution warrant.
Agents tracked down a known associate of Atsuki in the area and convinced him to cooperate.
That's what we're looking for. Okay.
He said he heard the suspect had come to Boston as part of a bank robbery plot.
Certainly first thing tomorrow morning, okay, as soon as I talk to that guy.
It was our belief that Ted Atsuki was in the Boston area in order to put together a collection of associates to formulate a plan by which they would identify and kidnap a bank official.
It appeared the shooting of the officers was completely unrelated, a tragic mistake. Investigators believed that on the night of the shootings, Ted Atsuki was in his apartment. Boston police arrived at the building in response to the domestic disturbance call. They believed Atsuki mistakenly assumed the officers were there to arrest him for violating his parole in Texas.
Boston PD, please let us in.
He grabbed his 9mm Sig Sauer and extra rounds of ammunition. When police buzzed asking for entry, Atsuki was ready to go. Police believed he jumped from a hallway window to the air conditioning unit below. Seconds later, the gunfight. Ted Atsuki was willing to do anything to escape. In 1987, Boston police and the FBI searched for Ted Atsuki, wanted for the shooting of 2 police officers. Special Agent Jay Fallon tried to narrow the search for the fugitive and predict his moves.
A very basic tenet in these type of investigations is to identify and interview the subject's friends and family and associates in an effort to determine any nuances insofar as what his likes, dislikes, where he might be.
They had contacted Leon Perry in San Francisco, whom they believed to be an associate, but he claimed not to know the fugitive. Surveilling Perry, they realized he was using Atsuki's car. They watched it, but never saw Atsuki. The FBI's database had revealed Leon Perry spent time in Leavenworth prison with Atsuki. When confronted, Perry admitted knowing the suspect, but said he had not spoken to him in months and had no idea where he was. They didn't have probable cause for an arrest, but they impounded the car and arranged for spot surveillance of Perry. When they searched his apartment, they found no sign of Atsuki. In Boston, the case took a tragic turn. The 2 wounded officers had been recovering well. But on October 26, 1987, Roy Sergi died suddenly when a blood clot lodged in his heart, causing cardiac arrest.
Detail! Bring his hand!
Sergeant Detective James Fong.
When I first learned that Roy had passed away, I was in complete shock. I had seen him 2 nights before, and he and I were engaged in small talk conversation. I remember Roy saying to me, I'll be seeing you guys upstairs, that being in the detective's room, working alongside with us upon his recovery. I made it a personal commitment to myself that we would seek out the individual that shot and killed Roy Sergi.
Ted Atsuki grew up in Texas and had family there. Hoping to find him, investigators interviewed his relatives in the area. They were shocked by the allegations and said they had not seen or heard from Atsuki in several months. They claimed they had no idea where he was.
Thanks for coming by.
To confirm their story, investigators subpoenaed their phone records. They discovered several recent calls from the relative's home to Atsuki's former roommate Leon Perry in San Francisco. The records also revealed calls to a second ex-convict, a former bank robber in Minnesota. The FBI brought him in, and he agreed to turn informant. He gave more details about Atsuki's plan for hostage-taking, bank robbery, and murder. Atsuki had associates create remote-controlled briefcase bombs to be handcuffed to the wrists of kidnapped bank officials. After the officials removed cash from their own vaults, Atsuki and his men would detonate the bombs to eliminate witnesses.
Many times people come up with ideas which others might think of as being harebrained, but Ted Atsuki took the time to actually plan such an endeavor and enlisted the help of professionals that were very, very capable of constructing these bombs and very capable of invading a home and very capable of robbing a bank.
Agents needed to confirm the story.
He told us that these briefcase bombs were being stored in a storage facility in San Francisco, which Atsuki had rented under an assumed name.
The FBI and the San Francisco Police Bomb Squad found the storage locker. And inside, the briefcase described by the informant. Not knowing exactly how the device was triggered, they had to be cautious. The specialists placed the briefcase far from the storage building, then attached a small charge designed to open the case without detonating any bomb inside. It was a pipe bomb, an improvised device made volatile by gunpowder held under pressure. When sparked, the powder burns so intensely, it bursts the metal pipe walls, sending deadly shrapnel flying in all directions. To render it safe, they needed to open the pipe, releasing the pressure on the gunpowder. Using a water cannon is the safest way to do so, according to San Francisco FBI Special Agent Philip Senna.
The cannon slug is forced out by water under great pressure. That way you're not firing something that has heat and flame directed at the pipe. You're sending something that's relatively benign in the effort to uncap the explosive before it can explode.
Instructor!
The device was very well constructed, quite sophisticated. It was designed to be placed and then detonated from a distance. I was told that the device was capable of killing somebody and having a relatively small blast radius, maybe 10, 15 feet, but being pretty devastating within that radius.
They later found and rendered safe a second bomb. The evidence was collected for processing at the forensics lab. Special Agent Fallon wanted to know if Atsuki's former San Francisco roommate, Leon Perry, knew about the bombs.
After the bombs were recovered, we re-interviewed Perry. Perry stated that he had no idea as to the existence of these bombs and certainly would have notified us if he did. We then sent the bombs and the materials to the lab, and we determined, the lab determined that, in fact, Perry's fingerprints were on the boxing materials that the bombs were in. Based on the fact that we truly didn't think that Perry was cooperating with us as completely as he could have and should have, we made the decision to revoke his parole and put him in jail.
Investigators had long suspected that Perry was actively involved with Atsuki. Now they had direct evidence. Unless he cooperated, Perry was facing a return to prison of up to 20 years. Special Agent Senna hoped to get him to talk.
We had enough evidence of his association with Atsuki and parole violation evidence that we had the ability to put a little pressure on him. He was comfortable in prison, so going back wasn't the worst possible thing that could have happened to him. We spent the first day probably 15 hours talking. And this went on for approximately a week, sometimes 10, 12, 14 hours. There were headache days.
Eventually, agents convinced Perry it was in his best interest to cooperate, and he began to talk.
That's where his car was. He needed me to go.
Perry said that on the day after the Boston shooting, he got a phone call in San Francisco.
He told us that Ted had called him, told him that things had gone bad in Boston.
Atsuki said he had shot 2 cops there, and that he was shot too. He told Perry he was calling from the airport in Dayton, Ohio. Atsuki said he had to fly to Texas where he could quietly get medical attention for his gunshot wound. Atsuki had left his car and the gun he used in the shootout at the Dayton airport. He asked Perry to go to Ohio and get it. Perry agreed.
Atsuki sent the keys to the automobile and the long-term parking ticket, overnight mail. He was to go to Dayton, recover the car, take the murder weapon, and destroy it. Drive the car back to San Francisco, unload the rest of the stuff from the car, and hide it.
Perry found the car as Atsuki described. Inside was the 9mm Sig Sauer.
The murder weapon was a high-quality handgun. He was reluctant to destroy that high-quality handgun. So he decided that he would take the handgun and give it to his father.
He drove to his parents' house in Missouri and left the gun there.
We contacted the father. I spoke with him. I assured him that his son was doing the right thing. I asked him if he still had the handgun, and he said that he had.
Missouri agents retrieved the Sig Sauer. Ballistics testing confirmed it was the weapon that fired the fatal bullets.
Fingerprints were found to be on a bullet within the weapon that matched Atsuki. So now we not only had the weapon that ballistics showed had killed the police officer, but we also had Atsuki's fingerprints on one of the bullets in the weapon.
With physical evidence implicating Atsuki in the murder of Roy Sergi and in the building of deadly bombs, the FBI placed Ted Atsuki on their 10 most wanted fugitives list. But the dangerous fugitive had been on the run for 4 months. By now, he could be anywhere. In 1988, the FBI continued a nationwide manhunt for Ted Atsuki, the suspected cop killer. On January 22nd of that year, they placed him on their 10 most wanted fugitives list. To further the publicity of the case, the FBI asked a nationally televised crime show to profile Atsuki. During the broadcast, an acquaintance of Atsuki's called the show's toll-free number. When it seemed he had a legitimate tip, operators patched him through to FBI Special Agent Jay Fallon.
Jay Fallon.
The caller said that Atsuki was especially close with 2 particular relatives living in Texas, and that if anyone knew Atsuki's whereabouts, it was this couple. Authorities had previously spoken with the couple, who claimed to have no contact with the fugitive.
If someone saw us at the birthday party, that's about it.
Checking the relatives' phone records, agents discovered a sudden increase in calls from Guadalajara, Mexico, where the family had other relatives. Atsuki might have fled there. The hunt extended into Mexico. FBI offices in foreign countries are called legal attachés. At the Mexico City legal attaché, FBI Special Agent Stephen Walker took on the case.
The FBI has no legal authority to conduct investigations on a foreign land according to the laws of that country. So we solicit, or the FBI would solicit, cooperation, form a liaison relationship, and request officially that the host country law enforcement agencies do the work of the FBI.
Special Agent Walker met with the Mexican Federal Judicial Police to ask for their assistance in searching for Atsuki.
We didn't have an exact address in Guadalajara, but we did have some suspect telephone numbers in that area, and investigation conducted at that time failed to locate the relative or to locate Atsuki.
Special Agent Fallon hoped Atsuki's former roommate, Leon Perry, could help them. Offering Perry immunity on the bomb-making charges, the FBI convinced him to wear a wire.
We had devised a plan by which we thought that Perry could speak with family members of Ted Atsuki in an effort to have the family be forthcoming and advise Perry as to where Atsuki might be.
Agents created a fake passport for Perry and coached him on how to draw the relatives in.
Doesn't work nights and never works in Mexico.
Perry got this bogus identification and was going to leave town, so to speak. That was the story that he was going to tell Atsuki's family in an effort to have the family reach out to Atsuki to speak with Perry. There was also the situation as to the murder weapon, and one of the biggest selling points was that Perry needed to know from the family what Ted wanted done with the murder weapon before he fled.
Check your mic again. Wait.
After several requests, Atsuki's Texas relatives agreed to meet with Perry, at a restaurant in Matamoros, Mexico. Outside, Boston Detective James Fong, FBI agents, and Mexican Federal Police waited, ready to listen in on the meeting.
All right. Mike, sounds good. We're ready to go.
Okay.
Other agents were inside.
Prior to the arrival of Perry, myself and another agent had gone into the restaurant and sat down in an effort to observe and surveil the situation. Perry walked in, sat at the bar.
He didn't have to wait long before Atsuki's relatives walked in.
We're going inside. Right here. How's it going?
Agents could hear them talking, but Atsuki was never mentioned. After a few minutes, Atsuki's male relatives said they needed to leave. The surveillance teams changed plans fast.
They're leaving. They're leaving. They're on the move.
I was concerned because that was not exactly what we were expecting.
In the vehicle right now. We're going to do a movement surveillance.
However, you have to have faith in the people that you have out there.
We'll pick it up here, and then you can pick it up in a few minutes. They're coming up to you.
They would have to stay close enough to maintain the audio signal, but still avoid detection. They hoped they were finally closing in on Ted Atsuki.
We'll pick it up here, and then you can pick it up in a few minutes.
In northern Mexico, Detective James Fong and other investigators had wired an informant and followed him as he met with relatives of suspected cop killer Ted Atsuki. Surveillance teams had to stay close to maintain the signal from the microphone they had on informant Leon Perry.
Hey, listen, I need to meet with Ted. I need to talk with Ted.
It's gonna be tough, I'm telling you.
Well, where is he?
He's not anywhere around here.
If he wants me to take care of the things he wants me to take care of, I'm gonna have to meet with him. And I can't tell. I don't know how else to tell you that.
Okay, I tell you what.
Finally, the relatives said they would call Atsuki.
My wife has a number. I think what we can do is to head over to the bus station.
The bus station?
They've got phones there.
Oh, okay.
And they may be able to
help us
Well,
connect to him.
Okay, well, do you think he'll meet with me after we talk to him?
I don't. He's not going to meet with you. He might talk to you over the phone, but that's about it.
The bus station was in the town of Matamoros, a few miles from the Texas border. Investigators watched as the relatives placed a call on a public long-distance telephone. Undercover agents kept a closer eye on them. The relatives spoke briefly, then gave the phone to Perry.
What's up?
It was Atsuki.
Where are you?
He told Perry to destroy the 9mm Sig Sauer. He said he'd been robbing banks in Mexico, but he wouldn't say exactly where.
All right, see you.
Still, the phone call was the best lead yet for Special Agent Philip Senna.
The Mexican federal authorities were able to get the phone number that was accessed from the clerks that run the bus station. The Federal Judicial Police were able to determine the location of that number in Guadalajara.
Working as a liaison with the Mexican Federal Police in Guadalajara was FBI Special Agent Stephen Walker.
We had the telephone number that was called. We knew it was Atsuki that was called. It was listed to a residence in Guadalajara, which turned out to be an apartment in the city. So it was just a matter then of going to Guadalajara, enlisting the services of the federal police to go to the apartment.
Teams of officers staked out the building, but there was no sign of Atsuki.
We were so close but we didn't have him yet. So in some ways, it was more difficult than not knowing where he was, because now that we knew where he was, we wanted him desperately, and we didn't know if we were going to be able to accomplish that.
Then, 2 days after the stakeout began, Ted Atsuki appeared. The officers moved in. Atsuki drew a gun, but didn't get a shot off this time. The federal police arrested him, then transferred custody to the FBI the next day. Ted Atsuki was found guilty of the attempted murder of George Torres and the first-degree murder of Roy Sergi. He was sentenced to life plus 20 years. Officer Torres recovered from his wounds and returned to active duty. He retired from the Boston Police Department in 1997. Roy Sergi, promoted to detective after the shooting, left behind a wife and 3 children and scores of friends on the Boston police force. The community room at the D14 police station is dedicated to his memory. George Torres hopes the legacy of the case helps keep other officers alive.
We try not to take anything as a routine call. There's no such thing as a routine call. You go there, expect the unexpected.
After the shooting, Boston police began issuing bulletproof vests to all officers and replaced their 6-shot revolvers with 15-round semi-automatics. Now they stand a better chance at coming out alive when the unexpected happens.